Go ahead, Mike. We're live. Hello, everybody. 1 second, everybody.
Hold on, I'm just trying to get this set up properly. Share.
There you go. You're live. I see your presentation. I can hear you well. We're doing good.
All right, fantastic. Welcome everyone. Thank you today for joining us for lunch. Hopefully everyone has received their Uber Eats vouchers so you can have lunch while enjoying this presentations. If for some reason you didn't get a voucher, your voucher didn't work, you'll have my contact information so we can send you your voucher after the fact. I'm actually, even though we are a California-based company, we work with clients nationwide, and I sit in New York, so I've been enjoying this frigid weather. I think last night, where I'm from in New York, just north of you folks, it was 10 degrees. So hopefully everyone's staying warm and cozy as we get closer to get into the holiday season here. So before we formally get started, I have just some housekeeping items to go over. So just for everyone's notice, their webinar is being recorded, and there will be a recording available to everyone that will be included in an email after the session. The PowerPoint presentation I'm going to use that I have up on my screen will be sent by me personally. So everyone, when I send that, will also have my contact information with any questions you have, and we'll have time at the end of the presentation to do some Q&A. For the purpose of this webinar, video, microphone, and chat is disabled for the audience. But again, we'll open it up at the end of the webinar for questions and answers. We do have a closed captioning service available through the Zoom app. If you have any technical issues with the webinar and the presentation, we recommend that you completely close Zoom and reopen Zoom. Worst case, restart your computer. Some legal advice, unless presented by an attorney. Nothing in these webinars is considered legal advice. Content in this webinar has been pulled from multiple sources and 501c Services 40 years of experience and expertise in the field. And last but not least, our certification codes for SHRM credit will be sent to the attendees along with the PowerPoint and the presentation. So you'll have my information. If for some reason you have trouble with the SHRM credit or redeeming your Uber Eats vouchers, just please reach out to me and I'll make sure you get those post-presentation if you haven't gotten the Uber Eats voucher before. All right. So good morning, New Jersey, or good afternoon, New Jersey. My name is Michael McClay. I'm the Senior Business Development Manager for 501c Services. So I've been working in the unemployment space, which sits at a unique crossroads, a crossroads between finance, accounting, and HR for over 25 years. Formerly, I served as an insurance broker in the P&C space, and I specialized in unemployment insurance for our nonprofit clients. And while this is a long story for this webinar, I used to be in the social services. I was a social worker. I work with children with autism spectrum disorders. And I also worked with people with mental illness and chemical addiction in a residential setting. So I've had the privilege to have been worked in the nonprofit side. All right, so this is my info again. I'll make sure everyone gets an email from me, so you'll have my information if you have any questions or need to follow up with me after the webinar. So today we're going to talk about just really high-level overview of how unemployment insurance works and the alternatives that are available to 501c3 organizations with regards to how they fund unemployment. And that's called reimbursing when you do anything but fund unemployment outside of paying state unemployment taxes. And we'll show some examples of different ways you can be a reimbursing organization, as well as their financial impact. And then Dan will talk about, what our role is and how we help support our clients that choose to become reimbursing with regards to how they fund and how they manage unemployment claims cost. So let's do a brief unemployment insurance 101, if you will. So unemployment benefits began in the USA in the 1930s following the Great Depression, the New Deal, where the federal government wanted to create a safety net for workers that lost their jobs through no fault of their own. And from 1930 to 1972, nonprofits did not have to pay into unemployment. But it wasn't until 1972 that nonprofits then had to pay into unemployment. But they had another option that for-profit businesses did not have, which basically means they can choose, instead of to fund unemployment through the tax system, they can choose to fund unemployment based on their own claims, essentially to do that on their own. So in 1972, just to summarize, 501(c)(3)s had to cover unemployment, but now they can choose to do so outside the state tax system, which is an option that's not available to a for-profit organization. So let's explain SUI. Now, I might throw that term around a little bit throughout the presentation. You might have heard that if you're in HR or payroll. SUI means state unemployment insurance. So, to avoid saying state unemployment insurance too many times too fast, I'm going to use SUI in place of state unemployment insurance. So how does state unemployment insurance or SUI work? Well, rates are adjusted annually by each state, and the state runs these programs as a risk pool. What I mean by that is, your tax rate is not dictated purely on your own claims, right? It's based on the experience and how the state runs that pool. And this is why this is something that a lot of nonprofits, should have an awareness on. And for the right nonprofit, it could be beneficial to consider not using the state pool because you may be in a situation where your tax rate far exceeds what you're actually pulling out of the state fund in terms of claims. So your claims could be much lower than what you're actually paying in taxes because of the way the states run that as a risk pool, right? Not always the case. We'll get into that later. So the total tax liabilities paid by employers are often greater than the claims paid, right? And the reserved are used in times of recession. So the the state fund basically applies every reserve to use against funds in any recession. But as we've seen, the state funds are typically chronically insolvent. In other words, they have to increase taxes every year and increase the amount of taxable income to keep pace with the amount of unemployment claims coming out of the system. And typically, a lot of these funds run in the negative, and that they have to borrow heavily from the federal government to be able to pay those funds. So from a payroll standpoint, I'm not going to get too much into the math, but your tax liability is basically, your total taxable wages times your employer rate. And I'll have a little illustration that goes inside a little bit further into the presentation. One important thing to understand about the cost of unemployment is that just have in your head what a single claim cost, right? A lot of folks, when you think of claims, I used to work in the insurance world. If you think about a workers' comp claim could be millions of dollars, right? But in New Jersey, a single claim, an unemployment claim is 22,750, right? That is the maximum amount that an unemployment claim can be in the state of New Jersey. So these have much lower ceilings than you would see in your average insurance claims and liability, workers' compensation, et cetera. So this is how that breaks out. So when someone claims unemployment in the state of New Jersey, right, they leave your organization, right? And if they left and if they're eligible for unemployment based on how they separated from your organization, they could go to New Jersey and they apply. And at that point, you can contest, right? If the claim is contestable. If it's not contestable, they can get up to $875 a week for 26 weeks, up to the maximum on the previous slide of over $22,000. That tax rate that we talked about. So in New Jersey, like the minimum tax rate you could have is 1.2%. The max is 5.8. And the wage base, and this is something that's really important to understand in terms of your costs, it's 43,300. What does that mean, the wage base? So for every employee, you pay your tax rate for unemployment on that wage base. In this case, $43,300 in 2025. All right, that's actually set to increase a little bit. It goes up year over year to 44,800, right? So even if your tax rate doesn't move a lot, right, you are taxed that number per employee per their wage base. So sometimes, especially for nonprofits, one thing you need to think through this if you look at like kind of like an insurance agency, a for-profit, they're pretty tend to be pretty static in terms of their payroll, right? So almost everyone hits that 43,300 because there's not a lot of turnover. But when you have a social service organization or a nonprofit that's providing services, you might have a lot of turnover, right? I'm not talking unemployment claims, but people leaving, right? People there temporarily, maybe summer help, you have camp counselors and things like this. And you'll have to replace those positions. So every time you have to replace a position, you reset that 43,300. So you end up paying 43,300 and then paying it again and paying it again. So what we see here, and I tell this to HR and accounting professionals, you could have a similar size nonprofit with a similar tax rate to a for-profit, but they're paying a lot more in unemployment taxes because of how the wage base works and because of the nature of their turnover. And then the last point here is that what we call the estimated improper payment rate. And this is important. So for New Jersey, that estimated improper payment rate is 18.56%. And what does that mean? So estimated improper payments have to basically come from overpayments. Um, Basically, these are from claims that have been overpaid, whether lion's share of this tends to be fraud, right? I know in New York, like two-thirds of this at least tends to be fraudulent claims or improperly charged claims. So, in terms of, how this is managed, the state pools really rely on the employer, right? And don't really police this themselves to monitor their own claims so that, if someone is not eligible for a claim of unemployment, it's really up to the employer to contest that properly within the appropriate window and to present evidence to the state to contest that claim, right? Same if someone goes to a second or third employer, you're actually sharing the claim amount with the second and third employer they go to, right? So you are expected, each employer is expected to monitor their payroll and be able to determine what portion of the claim is really theirs and should be paid. So there's a significant burden on the employer to monitor fraud and make sure that unemployment claims are properly handled and paid out the appropriate amounts, right? And that's why you see these significant payments, overpayments, state by state. Again, majority of this tends to be fraud. Fraud was rampant coming out of the pandemic. One of my clients was a nonprofit in Connecticut, and the director of finance that I was working with, we had scheduled a call to discuss their unemployment. And we got in the call, and he said, I have a funny story. So a couple of weeks ago, I got a claim of unemployment for myself. So they're getting pretty smart. Like I'm sitting talking to the director of finance, who's obviously sitting there gainfully employed, but nevertheless, there was an issue with identity theft, and they were attempting to claim unemployment against an existing employee that was there. So they're getting really smart in terms of using computers and AI to perpetuate fraud. So it's something to be aware of in terms of, monitoring claims of unemployment that come into your organization. Even if you don't anticipate having to contest a claim, you should be watching those claims as they come in to make sure that they're a valid claim, they're your employee, and that they are indeed eligible based on state guidelines to, they are indeed eligible to that claim of unemployment. So if you look on this list here, states that are in orange tend to have a much higher overpayment rate, whereas states in green tend to have a lower overpayment rate, less than 10%. New Jersey's, sits in the green, so pretty good, but still something to be aware of in terms of, the kinds of unemployment claims that you see for your own organization. And some payroll companies manage this to a point, or if you're in a professional employee organization, they manage this to a point, but they really can't identify what claims are valid unless there's some feedback from your HR teams in terms of, is this, one of your employees that was separated? What was the nature of that separation? That still lies with you as the employer to vet that, even if there is some monitoring service that you're currently using with your payroll provider. So let's talk about some of the alternatives to pay unemployment taxes. And again, we're looking at alternatives, and the first thing we have to figure out is, does that make sense, right? So, we do a free evaluation and we really look at, are you paying significantly more in payroll taxes versus the claims that the state is paying on your behalf? So some of the options you have, like I say, it boils down to, I call it 3.5, right? So you could either stay with the state tax, right? You can self-insure or reimburse, or you can buy insurance And here's the 3.5. You can self-insure and buy some insurance to mitigate some of the risk associated with self-insurance or reimbursing. So let's talk about how reimbursing works. So first, you have to be a 501(c)(3) to qualify to be able to become a reimbursing employer. That's been in the IRS tax code since 1972. If you're not a 501(c)(3), unfortunately, you're just like a for-profit. You have no choice but to fund your unemployment through the tax system. That also includes 503(b)s. I've had that question come up. It has to be a 501(c)(3) based on the present tax code. That excludes religious institutions. There's a different set of rules for a religious institution. Um, they can actually choose to exempt certain classes of employees, such as clergy. That's a whole nother seminar. If you happen to be a religious institution and are on this webinar, you can choose to become reimbursing, but you actually might have a third option. So that's something to talk about and reach out to me after the webinar. But I just wanted to, talk about that for a second because there's, a third option that may exist if you're a religious institution. In terms of the size of the organization, reimbursing really starts to make sense once you're over $2 million in gross annual payroll. Now, it doesn't mean we don't have clients that are under 2 million. It may make sense. I've had some small organizations that, I'm working with one right now that in the last 10 years, they've had zero claims of unemployment, but nevertheless, they're paying $20,000 every year on unemployment taxes. So they made a decision to work with us to help mitigate the risk of becoming reimbursing so that they can achieve that savings of 15,000 year over year. So that's one of those outlier case that might make a lot of sense to do that. But generally speaking, you want to be over $2 million in gross annual payroll for the numbers to make more sense. And then have a positive audit over the past 3 years. What does that mean? So positive audits means that you don't anticipate, we haven't seen significant swings and values in terms of your unemployment claims. So, I've worked with organizations that they may have more unemployment claims coming out of the state, being paid by the state on their behalf, than they actually do in taxes. So they're actually saving money being in the tax fund. And usually you only see that's the case maybe for 1 or 2 years because eventually, like the state of New Jersey is going to increase taxes commensurate with that, right? So you're going to pay the max tax rate. So you may end up eventually paying more in taxes or equal to what your claims pay out, but not always the case. So every time I do an analysis, that's something we always point out if that's the case, because then it wouldn't make any sense to become a reimbursing employer. Stay where you are within the tax fund. And then we want to make sure that you don't anticipate any major disruption in funding over the next 24 months. And what I mean by that, if I was working with another employer that did anticipate a couple of grants ending, and it was there, they really thought that they're going to end up having to lay off 20 employees at that point. If you know that's going to happen and you anticipate that over the next 2 years, reimbursing may not be for you because then you're going to have to pay potentially in managing those claims more in claims costs than you would be paying in taxes. So these are a couple of things that you should consider in terms of whether or not reimbursing may or may not be a fit for you. And this is something we do with every one of our members before they make any decision to potentially become reimbursing and evaluating that. So how does reimbursing work? Like, what does that mean? So basically, what it means you're no organization no longer overpays to the state tax, right? You don't have to pay state unemployment insurance taxes anymore. And the employees, they still go to New Jersey to claim unemployment, right? So nothing changes from the perspective of the employees whatsoever. They're largely never aware that you're reimbursing or tax paying. And then the state will bill your organization dollar to dollar for unemployment claims. So every quarter you get a bill from the state. Hey, you had X amount of claims come in. This is what was paid, right? You owe us. Basically reimburse us. Hence the term reimbursing. You're now reimbursing the state based on your own claims and not based on the tax rate that they assign to in the risk pool. So again, process is seamless to the employee. There's no difference to them. And now you're only responsible for the charges that your organization incurs at that point. General benefits of reimbursing. Well, it saves money. So, we've been doing this for well over 30 years, and on average, our members save 20 to 40% less than they are over the tax system. We also know that the state tax systems, they tend to fluctuate, and coming out of the pandemic, because a lot of the state tax funds were chronically insolvent. For example, in Connecticut, they increased how much they organizations pay in the tax system by over 40%. They did that very significantly, raising the wage base, how much of that income is taxable. And they did it to keep pace with the claims and make sure that they don't become insolvent again and paying off their debt. So several other states are following suit. We don't see this in New Jersey yet, although there is an incremental increase in not the taxes, but in the amount of income that is taxed. It is something that you want to have an awareness of. And if anything you get out of this presentation is to be aware of what the state is doing in terms of how they manage and fund unemployment. Because if you happen to be in one of those states where they're going to have a significant increase to keep pace with claims, then that might be a time you might want to consider at least do an evaluation of your cost. Um, the other part is the control of expenses. So typically when organizations choose to reimburse, because they're paying on their own claims, they tend to take a little bit more of a stewardship of their unemployment process. Working with us, we basically manage that process and work with you to contest claims that are indeed contestable. It is a significant administrative burden for our nonprofit organizations. And anyone in HR who has to work through an unemployment claim will tell you sometimes it can be very difficult, even when the individual was terminated for cause or was a no-show and should not be eligible for unemployment. It still can be difficult in contesting that claim and contesting that claim successfully. So we work with our member organizations to make sure that they are successful in contesting claims. So for example, we'll have, almost a 90% success rate in like the state of New Jersey and New York, whereas organizations will report on a success rate like we're lucky if we're successful half of the time in terms of presenting the evidence and getting the result we want. Um, so options available in all states. Right. Again, best for employees with, more than 2 million in payroll. I know it says 1 million here, but really it's more than 2 million in payroll and 15 to 25 full-time employees. So I want to get into some examples of what reimbursing could look like for an organization. I want to get into that in a second. So he talked about some ways you can manage your unemployment. So you can manage your own program, in-house. So you don't necessarily need to work with an organization like us to become reimbursing. If you want to have some risk management behind managing the claims and services of our organization, you can outsource that function to us. Helps to administer and monitor your claims as well as provide HR assistance in managing the claims process in terms of, if you have a difficult separation or if you need to develop policies that will help you and aid you in contesting claims when it's appropriate to do so. And then we'll also talk about, buying insurance. So you can buy insurance to mitigate the risk. So instead of fully self-insuring, you can choose to buy insurance, in addition to when you become a reimbursing employer. So let me get into some examples because I'm better with numbers and some looking at pretty pictures when thinking about this. But it's actually pretty simple. Um, so I'm not going to get into this. So I'm going to get back into how SUI is calculated. But we talked about this a little bit. It's your wage base times your tax rate, right? And that tells you what your contribution per employee is. So it's pretty simple through your payroll reports to determine what you're paying in unemployment taxes, right? I'm not going to go deep into the math. So here's some real life examples in the state of New Jersey with regards to unemployment or nonprofit organizations that we've worked with. So this particular organization was a human services nonprofit, and their taxable payroll was 7.5 million. They had a tax rate which was relatively low, 2.1%. It wasn't the max of 5.8. But their claims are only 32,650. So here's an example where when you looked at their unemployment taxes, again, you can get this from your payroll reports. They were paying 157,000 on average in payroll taxes. So this is an organization that we would say, I think it really makes sense to consider becoming reimbursing and looking at different ways to be reimbursing because they're going to save almost $125,000 year over year based on their numbers. And at that savings, then you could easily buy insurance and add some other support, and you're still going to be saving significant dollars, even buying insurance to mitigate any risk associated and to manage those claims. Nope, I jumped ahead a bit. My mouse is sensitive. There you go. So here's a small organization. This is an SPCA, another overpayment example. And this organization had under a million, so 707,000 in taxable payroll. Their tax rate is 3.38%. Annual claims of 5,900. And their taxes is, just call it 24,000. So they're going to save $18,000 outside of the state tax system. So in this case, they should definitely consider reimbursing, and we can look at different options. But we have to the organization has to really think about what they anticipate in terms of turnover. If they're going to have to, do they anticipate laying over employees? Because when you think about becoming reimbursing, some organizations, and it's becoming very popular, especially coming out of the pandemic. A lot of organizations, unfortunately, are struggling with funding. A lot of organizations are looking to save as much as they can immediately. So they're looking for that first year savings, right? And we're a very no sell type organization. So, even when you do get significant savings that first year, really got to think about what does this look like long term for your organization? Will this really work in 5 years and in 10 years, right? Um, so the idea is not just to do this because you're going to save $18,000 year one, but what does that look like in years two, three, and four? So every year that your claims are significantly less than your taxes, you get to, take that money back or put it aside in a fund. So one way we do this is to put money in a fund. So instead of paying into the tax fund, and if your claims are less, you never get that money back, you can put that in a reserve account with us. That's your own account, right? You're not sharing that with other members and you get interest on that account. So instead of putting all this money to taxes, some organizations, what they choose to do is take what they were paying in taxes, put it in a reserve fund. Now I'm making interest. I can get that money anytime. So I have access to those funds. And if at the end of the year, I haven't used that money for claims, then I can either take that money out or I can simply roll it into the fund and keep making interest on that money. So that's why I always tell organizations, think about this from a long-term perspective, right? So if we see an organization, their claims history where they have a lot of claims and a little claims and a lot of claims and a little claims, you see that up and down curve, you know, you might not be a fit for reimbursing because there's not a lot of predictability there, right? From a long-term perspective, you might break even or you might actually do worse than if you stayed in the tax fund, right? So before we go any further, what I wanted to do is present just a poll question. I want to put that up right now. So the question is, how are you currently handling your unemployment? Because I think the best thing you could get out of this seminar was develop an awareness in terms of are you reimbursing? Are you tax paying? I also put I don't know because there's a lot of organization. That's fine. If you came onto this webinar, you don't know, that's something that hopefully you can leave the webinar and you can, do some investigation and figure out how you're currently handling this. If you don't know, if you look at your payroll reports and your payroll company is deducting unemployment insurance tax or SUI, you might be tax paying, right? Very rare that they would be doing that and you're reimbursing. That's a whole nother issue. I've seen that once in 20 years. But generally, if they're deducting for unemployment insurance taxes, you're tax paying. If you see zeros in the line on your quarterly state payroll tax returns, zeros where it should be an unemployment amount in the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter, then you might be reimbursing because you have to let the payroll company know not to deduct for unemployment taxes. But we can help you figure it out. So one thing that we look at here, and actually I got some good responses. So we got three so far reimbursing, three tax paying, one I don't know. It's an anonymous poll, and that's perfectly fine. Um, I think it's good exercise to have an awareness of how we're currently funding this, and just to do some diligence from a financial perspective to make sure that you're funding this in the best possible way for your organization. So, one way to get some information that would be really helpful analysis. In New Jersey, it's actually a little bit easier. There's this form. It's called the Notice of Employer Contribution Rates. I could even include a copy of this in my follow-up of the presentation. On that form, it lists on section on item D your last 3 years average of claims and your last 5 year average of claims. So we can get a 5 year average of what your claims looks like just by looking at this form. So getting a copy of this, and usually you get it around February, typically, right? I think in New Jersey it's closer to August. So you should have a copy of your 2025 Notice of Employer Contribution Rates if you're tax paying, and that should tell you what your current tax rate is and what you've been paying in claims, like your actual claims that have been paid by the state on your behalf. So this starts as a basis to determine, well, really ask the first question, does it make sense to consider and look even further? So we look at that first because obviously if your taxes are less than what you're paying in claims, we'll tell you to stay put. It doesn't make sense to look further. But if it's a significant disparity and difference between your claims versus what you're paying in taxes, then it's like, we should look at this further. We don't say you should definitely do it, but let's do some analysis. Let's get some more of your payroll data. Let's talk about the kind of claims you're having, and then we can, model a few different options in terms of how you can fund unemployment that may be beneficial to your organization. Just so everyone knows, the funny story, the most I've ever saved an organization funding unemployment outside the state tax system was $1.2 million, and that was year one. They saved over almost $6 million over 5 years, and that was a college with 1,200 employees approximately. That's the most I've ever saved an organization with regards to how they fund unemployment. The least was about, I want to say, 12, $13,000, and that was an organization that in 10 years they were able to show me I haven't had one claim on unemployment. Nevertheless, I'm paying all this payroll tax year over year. And what they did is they put that payroll tax in a fund. So they, instead of paying tax, they've been reimbursing and they put it in a fund. And that fund made interest. And they worked with us on, if they had a claim, come to us. I think they had one the last 5 years, and that was $300. And that's just been, at this point, over $200,000 of savings over the last 6, 7 years. So it's from a long-term perspective, again, it worked very well for their particular organization, but every organization is different. All right. So I'm going to go a little bit into our organization, and then I'm going to open up to some Q&A. So just a little bit about us. We're 501c services. We've been doing this since the beginning. So since the since the first group of nonprofits got together and said, hey, we want to be reimbursing, but we want to figure out a couple of different ways how we can do this and be smart about managing that cost, is how 501c services really came to be. So we were founded in 1982 by a former UCP executive. We created our first for kind grantor trust. So we have a reserve trust at accrued interest where you can contribute to an account to pay for future claims. That's one more conservative way to manage unemployment. So that you basically build a fund so that if you do have a poor year in terms of claims, you have a fund that makes interest that you've put aside to fund those claims. And we currently do that for almost 3,000 nonprofit organizations throughout the country. We became 100% employee owned in 2016. So we're all employee owners. And I have to say, I've been working with 501c services in the broker side, in the insurance world, for a couple of years. I started working with them 4 months ago, and it feels like I'm working for a not-for-profit again. Feel like I'm back my social service days. So that's the spirit and the philosophy and how people think about what we do in terms of how we interact with organizations. We want to help support your mission in any way we can. So managing unemployment is what we do. We also have a career to date 97% retention rate. Part of the reason we have a 90%, 7% retention rate, by the way, is because we're very conservative. We want to make sure that this is a fit for your organization. The last thing we want to do is put someone into a reimbursing model and the model doesn't make sense and they end up losing money. So we're very careful about putting our potential clients in that position. So we make sure to help you thoroughly vet if it makes sense to become reimbursing. We do have a client relations team, so these are some of the people that you would be working with. Nicole Korn has been doing unemployment for I want to say well over 25 years, and she's the smartest person in the industry. Previously, I thought I was the smartest person in this industry, and then Nicole proved me very, very wrong. She's very good at what she does. And then we have a client relations team. So likely, if you're potentially going to work with us in New Jersey, you're probably going to be dealing with Gary or Beth. And then we got Julie who helps to run our team. So we're very kind of traditional in terms of our service model. We believe that, you should, it's great to have an online portal. We have that, but we very much believe in having a person assigned to your account and having a relationship with the person that manages your day-to-day business. Some of the things we do to support unemployment, obviously, is claims management. But if you're going to choose to become reimbursing, obviously managing the claims, every dollar you can control is more money that your organization saves, right? And one way to do that is to have effective HR. So sometimes contesting a claim comes down to, well, your job description or what kind of progressive discipline happened before the separation. How did you document that discipline? What are the facts of the case if you choose to contest a claim? I actually had an individual that was in an overnight program watching children with autism, and he kept on falling asleep on the job. And this was caught on security camera footage. And he was given several warnings, but unfortunately, he kept on doing it, so they had to let him go. And they actually lost when he claimed unemployment. They went to contest, saying no, he was terminated for cause. He wasn't fulfilling his job duties. He was negligent, falling asleep. Unfortunately, they lost the claim of unemployment, and we stepped in and engaged him as a client. And the reason is because even though they had him falling asleep on video, it was a still image. His eyes were closed. So the the court looked at it and said, from a hearing standpoint, they said, well, that's not proof he was sleeping. That just shows that he blinked. So we had to work with them to get video that did not have any participants in the background for HIPAA and privacy, showing that he was in fact, moving video, falling asleep. So it's things like that, that could, mean the difference of paying an unemployment claim or not paying an unemployment claim. So we provide HR services, but also as a part of managing risk, right? So if the maximum claim is over $22,000, we want to make sure that that claim doesn't get to that point, right? We don't want someone taking unemployment for 26 weeks. I know that unemployment is not going to cover my entire wage. So I'm probably really suffering and struggling those 26 weeks. So we provide services to help your separated employees find the next step in the journey. The sooner they can do that, the sooner they come off unemployment. So it's better for the organization and it's better for the individual as well and the employee in taking their next step. And then, there's options for protection, right? So in terms of insurance protection, it's a whole nother webinar, but one of the things I will say there's you can buy stop loss insurance, which basically caps your maximum risk in terms of what a bad unemployment claims year will be. So like, hey, we'll cap it at, let's say a really bad year for you would be $500,000 in claims. Let's make sure that, we'll cap it at 300,000, right? There's also some products out there that basically instead of self-funding unemployment at all, you buy an insurance policy that funds all or most of your unemployment claim. This has been somewhat attractive the last few years, but you have to be careful because sometimes those premiums really, you know, they really kind of absorb a lot of the savings. And I always tell clients like sometimes that works depending on your financials and underwriting, where a guarantee cost policy could be very effective. But a lot of times I've also seen those policies, and I came from the insurance world. Like the cost is so high, you might as well say tax paying because technically as a taxpayer, that is guaranteed cost. You get your tax rate, right? Every year it's like a renewal, and that's your number, and that's what you're paying for the year, right? So technically you're on a guaranteed cost type of program when you're off the state. But nevertheless, it is an option, and we always, consider every alternative, every option available, and we model those. So we take your 5 years of claims, and we apply a model. This is what it would look like if you did a fully insured program. This is what self-insured reimbursing looks like. This is what it looks like if you bought some stop loss insurance. So you make it very easy to understand and be able to really consider your options so you can make an informed decision if this makes sense for your organization. We provide professional claims management. We tout a win rate of almost 90%, which I say is really pretty good in New York and New Jersey, where it can be very difficult to contest. We retain at 97, 98%. And from a claim standpoint, engaging our people and having questions, it's unlimited. If generally our clients don't need to call us like every day, but if you have a particularly difficult separation and need to talk to us a couple times in the day, You need to talk to us every day in a particular week. There's no limit on the amount of consultation we provide. These are some of the folks that we work with in HR. We provide consultations one-on-one, educational opportunities, along with the resource library. And here's a summary of some of the HR services we provide. So because we do a lot from an HR standpoint because it helps your organization be more just be a lot more effective in managing claims. If we can provide some HR resources, not going to replace what you might be doing with your outsourced HR provider, but we fill a lot of the gaps and we provide a lot of trainings and a lot of value adds for the members that work with us to become reimbursing. See some of the educational opportunities we provide. We do seminars, managing challenging employees, documenting employee events, basics of employee handbook. Again, all things that will help you manage your culture, your people, as well as the claims management process will be a lot easier and smoother. So this all works well just to help make us and make you more effective in managing unemployment claims. And this is just a little bit about our reemployment services, where we provide online job coaching, as well as online search for employees looking for the next step in the journey so that they don't have to take unemployment, hopefully knock on wood, for 26 weeks. And we have a Shield program. This is our online tool. So if you want to track your claim and view what we're doing online and look at the trainings we have on offer, everything is available through our online portal. So before we go any further, I wanted to open things up to some Q&A. So I'm going to put up my Q&A and I'm going to take some questions. So first question, if you are a reimburser but anticipating substantial layoffs in the coming year, what is the process for becoming a taxpayer? So that's a good question. So if you're a reimburser and you have to be, once you become a reimburser, typically you have to be a reimburser for 2 years before you can come back in. So assuming that you've been a reimburser for over 2 years, it's all you have to do is, I believe the state of New Jersey, you have to write a letter or contact New Jersey Department of Labor. You have to generally, I recommend doing this by end of the year, but generally you have, and I'll double check on this until February 2nd to opt back in. And then that is confirmed with the letter back from the state that you're now opt back into the tax system. The thing that you do have to consider is what the new business tax rate is, because if you've been out of the New Jersey taxes for some time, you're not necessarily going to go at the lowest rate of 1.8, right? I want to say that the new business tax rate is over 3%. So I want to consider that in potentially becoming a taxpayer. But we have seen organizations do that where they anticipate significant attrition in the following year. And maybe it makes a lot of sense at that point to opt back into New Jersey state tax system. There's no underwriting. So it doesn't matter that you anticipate claims and layoffs. They have to let you back in if you want to come in. The other one is, how long does this process typically take? So it doesn't take that long at all. So for us, it really depends on how quickly, if you want us to do an analysis to see if this makes sense, it depends on how quickly you can get the information back to us. So really, we're looking for that notice of employer contribution rates form. Will tell us what your claims history looks like. And we need some payroll data from you. So we need like some your 941 payroll tax returns from Q3 2024 through Q2 2025. Right. And that should all be in your payroll system. And then we come back with analysis and we can discuss, does it make sense? And if it does, here are some options in terms of what it would look like to fund unemployment outside the state tax system. So I've seen it go as quickly as a week from when we get the data to we turn around a proposal and analysis. Others, again, depends on how long it takes you to get that information. If you're not sure of like how to get some of this information, or if you can't get your notice of employer contribution rates, I always tell reach out to me and I can help walk you through the process with Department of Labor. Typically, you can get a lot of this information on New Jersey's employer Department of Labor website. Um, First, how do you become a 501c3? I've been getting a runaround longest but no resolve. So That unfortunately that kind of falls in the heading of legal advice. I can't tell you necessarily how in the state of New Jersey and based on your particular situation, you can become a 501(c)(3). But I've seen organizations do that when they start to realize, as long as it's appropriate to become a 501(c)(3), that there'll be significant tax advantages. And that's something I do recommend if you want to reach out to me, you need to talk to an attorney and an accountant that has experience dealing with 501(c)(3)s, because part of that is, making sure that, does that make sense based on the tax advantages of being a 501(c)(3). But I have presented this to for-profit organizations that do mission type of work that have saved significant dollars. And actually, looking at their unemployment cost savings was a significant driver in them deciding to go through the process of, reorganizing as a 501(c)(3). So that's a good question. One here is we have employees who live in Pennsylvania, but we pay unemployment for these employees in New Jersey. Will that still happen on their reimbursable scenario? So we have to look a little bit closer at your payroll, but they live in Pennsylvania, but you pay unemployment to those employees in New Jersey. So, you know, you can become reimbursing and be reimbursing in multiple states. So, the cleanest way to do that is to, even if you're deducting unemployment and withholding from New Jersey and not Pennsylvania, is to, become reimbursing in both states, right? So we have to look at your payroll and see how that's organized to give you a better answer. But that's not a problem. Matter of fact, becoming if you have employees in multiple states, that's a little bit more difficult to manage from an unemployment standpoint for the organization. And we make that a lot easier. I had an organization that was in 26 different states, and some states they were reimbursing, some states they were tax paying, and some states they really didn't know. So it was very challenging to manage the whole thing. So we ended up, getting them out of each state. We handle all of that. So part of working with us, if we do analysis and this makes sense, we do all the heavy lifting in terms of getting you into a reimbursing status. One thing that is important to know in New Jersey, you have until February 2nd as the deadline to become reimbursing, if that's something you want to consider. Yeah, and turnaround's pretty quick. So, we're currently looking at other New Jersey organizations to see if it makes sense in doing that evaluation. We're going to be doing those up through the middle of January. We'll get a few last minute. They'll ask us a week before to do it, and we've done it, but I think it all depends on how your appetite to and how quickly you want to work through these things. And we also want to make sure you have really enough time to make an informed decision, right? So we don't want to do anything where you're rushed to make a decision, and it ends up not being the right decision for organization. So I would say, if that's something you're looking to do, you want to kind of start thinking in that direction, reach out to us so that we can take a look and do an analysis and at least have something by mid-January. So you have, a couple of weeks to decide if it makes sense to do so. Uh, so yeah, so another question here, these are good questions. Can you switch from reimbursement to taxpayer while the organization is paying open unemployment claims? So yes, you can absolutely do that. For the same reason, like typically when you come out of the state tax system, at least for most of the following year. So if let's say you did that for 2026, for most of 2026, the state is still paying your claims, which is why the savings the first year tends to be really good. And that's also why I say don't do this for the first year savings. We got to, it's the other years and what that looks like that really should dictate whether you do this. But you get usually a healthier amount of savings. So that organization I saved a lot of money for was 1.2 million. It was like 1.2 million year one. And the following year is around 750 to 800,000, right? Because the state was still handling most of their claims. That's because there's a lag associated when claims are developed and they're paid out, right? Um, Same goes for unemployment. So if you're reimbursing, there'll be a lag based on when they apply for unemployment. You're still going to be paying unemployment claims as a reimburser into the following year based on when those claims came in, right? And then the state is going to pick up in the liability in the following year. But there's a lag in New Jersey in terms of when the payments happen. So that's something you have to account for. So we've seen reimbursers, they'll won't budget any money for reimbursed unemployment claims. They'll become tax paying. Like, wait a minute, we just got all these claims that are still being billed back to us. Well, because you were still 6 months in the rears as a lag state. So that's something to think about. And if you want to take a look at that, we can look at some of your numbers and you should be able to see as a reimburser kind of get a trend in terms of what you might expect in terms of a lag based on the claims that have already gone through your hands. But that's a great question. All right. Any other questions? I didn't answer them in the chat, but I answered them live, so hopefully that was okay. The other thing I was going to mention, because a lot of organizations today, this question has just come up almost every other webinar I've been on, so I always answer it. If you're in a PEO, so if you're in a professional employer organization, your FEIN, basically your employees are under their FEIN and also under their state ID number for unemployment. So if you're in a PEO, you can't necessarily become reimbursing unless you exit the PEO. But typically you're in a PEO because of a significant savings of benefits. But that's something to consider. Some organizations that are looking to exit a PEO, that could be a good time to consider becoming a reimbursing organization and doing that due diligence, because then you're going to pay the PEO's tax rate and then have to now pay unemployment on your own under the new business tax rate. All right, just looking for any other questions. I think that's all of them. If you had a question and I didn't get to it, it looks like I have them all. I'll put some of my information up on the screen. Right now, I just have a collection. These are some of the organizations that we work with in New Jersey that we currently help, and some information on what some of our members are saying. Again, we retain at 97, 98%. And by the way, that wasn't last year. That's career to date. That's in the over 30 years our organization has been practicing. So again, we work very hard and we make sure to, work with organizations and only, put them into a reimbursing model when it really makes sense. So I'm just going to play a quick video and then I'll have my contact information up, just a little testimonial from one of our members, and then we'll conclude our presentation after the video. So hopefully this works okay. Looks like we're good. All right.
What makes me passionate about working for a non-for-profit organization is because I knew I always wanted to work for a mission-driven organization.
Our mission is to work with immigrant communities so that they can achieve the American dream.
501 helps focus our service to the community by giving us more time.
501 helps us focus on serving our communities by providing services directly to our HR professionals.
The biggest benefit for working with 501 is really the transparency and ability to forecast our costs when it comes to our unemployment benefits.
They also keep our cash flow steady through claims that are sound and take a lot of the admin burden off of us so we can just stay on autopilot.
We're very grateful for all the support you provided over the last 4 decades, and we wish you continued success in the future.
Congratulations, 501, on your 40th anniversary. It's been a pleasure serving with you for the last 24 years.
I love that video from Boys and Girls Club celebrating anniversary. That's we've had the privilege to work with them for a really long time. So that concludes our presentation. Again, everyone's going to get an email from me. You'll have a copy of the presentation, right? We'll make sure to email the Sherman credit so you can apply and get the credit for the presentation. And you'll have this PowerPoint as well. This is my email and my direct phone number up on here, and it'll also be in my email. So if you have any questions or if you want us to help you look at this a little bit deeper, feel free to reach out to me, and we're happy to help. All right. So I don't see any other questions. Sounds good. So if I don't talk to anyone on the call, if I don't see you, have a happy holiday and a wonderful new year. Take care, everyone.